When priceless peacock figurines disappear from the British Museum, replaced by a single ceramic cat, it seems like a simple theft. But in Hercule Poirot's world, nothing is ever quite as it appears. Welcome to Cafe Stories. I'm your host, Alfie. Today, we're joining the incredible Poirot in The Cat Among the Peacocks. Before we begin, please tell me in the comments below where you are listening from. Let's get started, shall we? The Cat Among the Peacocks. Chapter 1. A Peculiar Substitution. The English spring had arrived with its characteristic indecision, alternating between brilliant sunshine and sudden, drenching showers. I had been back in London for precisely 3 days, having left the consistent heat of Argentina for what I hoped would be the gentle warmth of an English April. So far I had been disappointed. I made my way along the familiar streets, dodging puddles and fellow pedestrians, with equal care, my thoughts dwelling on my old friend whom I was about to visit. It had been nearly 18 months since I had last seen Hercule Poirot, and I found myself wondering if he had changed in any significant way. Somehow, I doubted it. Poirot was as immutable as Gibraltar. The building where he kept his flat appeared exactly as I remembered. I bounded up the steps with perhaps more enthusiasm than dignity and rang the bell. Within moments, the door swung open to reveal Georges, Poirot's perfect valet, who acknowledged me with the barest hint of surprise in his otherwise impassive features. "Captain Hastings." "What a pleasure, sir. Monsieur Poirot will be most gratified. Please come in." I stepped into the hallway, handing him my hat and coat, still damp from a recent shower. "Is he in, Georges?" "Indeed, sir. Monsieur is in the sitting room. He is—" Georges hesitated, something most unusual for him. "Yes," I prompted. "He is rearranging his bookshelves, sir, by country of author, alphabetically within each country." I smiled. Some things never changed. "I'll go in, shall I?" "Very good, sir." I crossed to the familiar door and knocked lightly before entering. The scene that greeted me was exactly as Georges had described. Books were stacked in neat piles across every surface, and in the centre of it all stood the diminutive figure of Hercule Poirot, balanced on a small step-ladder, a volume in each hand, his head tilted to one side as he considered their proper placement. "My dear Poirot," I called out. He turned with such sudden enthusiasm that for a moment I feared for his balance. His face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Mon ami Hastings!" he exclaimed, carefully descending the ladder with the caution of a man who valued precision in all things. "But this is magnificent. What a delight to see you after so long." He crossed the room, navigating around the book piles with surprising agility for a man of his particular build, and clasped my hand warmly between both of his. I noticed that his moustache appeared, if possible, even more elaborately groomed than I remembered. "You are well, I hope? The climate of South America has agreed with you? You look, how shall I say, more weathered, perhaps, but robust." "I'm in excellent health, thank you, Poirot." "And you seem exactly the same." "Ah, the same?" No, my friend. The years, they advance for us all, but I maintain, as always, the good order in method." He gestured toward the books. "You find me in the midst of reorganization. One must have a system, you understand?" "Of course," I said, not understanding in the slightest why perfectly organized books needed reorganizing, but knowing better than to question his methods. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. How this can wait. Georges will bring tea, and you shall tell me all about your adventures in Argentina. You are here for a visit? How long do you remain in London?" Before I could answer, the telephone rang. Poirot frowned slightly at the interruption, but moved to answer it, lifting the receiver with a precise gesture. "Allô?" "Yes, This is Hercule Poirot speaking." He listened for a moment, his expression sharpening with interest. "Indeed? Most curious. Yes, of course. I shall attend to it immediately. Within the hour, Sir Edmund. Au revoir." He replaced the receiver and turned to me, his eyes gleaming with that particular light I knew so well. The spark that appeared only when his interest was genuinely engaged. That, my friend, was Sir Edmund Faraday, director of the British Museum. It appears that something most unusual has occurred. A collection of ancient Egyptian artifacts, specifically a set of peacock figurines of great value, has disappeared from their display. "Stolen?" I asked, immediately intrigued. "So it would seem, but there is more. In place of these peacock figurines, the thief has left—" He paused, dramatically, his finger raised. "A small ceramic cat." I raised my eyebrows. "A calling card of some sort?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps something more significant." Sir Edmund was most agitated. "He has requested my presence at the museum without delay." Poirot glanced at me, a small smile playing about his lips. "Would you care to accompany me, mon ami? It seems your return to London may be more eventful than you anticipated." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied truthfully. Georges entered with a tea tray, but Poirot waved it away with a regretful sigh. "Alas, Georges, duty calls. Captain Hastings and I must depart immediately for the British Museum. Please call for a taxi." 20 minutes later, our taxi pulled up before the imposing facade of the British Museum. The rain had stopped for the moment, and weak sunshine glinted off the wet stone steps. A uniformed attendant hurried down to meet us as we climbed out, recognizing Poirot immediately. "Mr. Poirot, sir. Sir Edmund is waiting for you in his office. This way, please." We followed him through the massive bronze doors and into the echoing vastness of the museum. I had always found the hush of museums somewhat oppressive, but today there was an added tension in the air, a sense of suppressed excitement and alarm. The attendant led us up a side staircase and down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-looking gentlemen, previous directors, I assumed, before ushering us into a spacious office where 3 people awaited us. Sir Edmund Faraday was a tall, spare man with thinning grey hair and the perpetually distracted air of someone whose mind was always partly elsewhere. He rose to greet us, his handshake firm despite his evident distress. "Mr. Poirot, thank you for coming so promptly. And your associate is—" "Captain Hastings, an old friend and colleague," Poirot supplied. "You may speak freely before him." Sir Edmund nodded to me briefly before turning back to Poirot. "This is Dr. Geoffrey Hawthorne, our curator of Egyptian antiquities, and Miss Henrietta Webb, his assistant." Dr. Hawthorne was a round-faced man of about 50 with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard. He twisted the end of his moustache between his fingers as he nodded at us, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Miss Webb, by contrast, stood perfectly still, a slender woman perhaps in her 30s, with observant grey eyes and an air of contained efficiency. "Please, gentlemen, sit down." Sir Edmund gestured to the chairs before his desk. "The situation is most grave. The peacock figurines of Amenhotep, among our most valuable Egyptian acquisitions, have been removed from their display case and replaced with this." He reached into a drawer and carefully placed a small object on his desk. It was a ceramic cat, perhaps 4 inches tall, glazed in a muted green with startlingly lifelike eyes of some amber-coloured stone. Poirot leaned forward, examining the figurine without touching it. He circled his head slowly, viewing it from different angles, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "Most interesting," he murmured. "And when was this substitution discovered?" "This morning," Dr. Hawthorne replied, his voice higher than I expected from a man of his build. I was conducting my usual morning inspection of the galleries before opening. The case appeared undisturbed, but when I looked closer, he spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "The security system?" Poirot inquired. "That's the most baffling part," Sir Edmund interjected. "It was not triggered. The case shows no signs of being forced. It's as if someone had a key," Miss Webb finished quietly, speaking for the first time. Her voice was low and measured, but there was a tension in it that caught my attention. Poirot's eyes flickered toward her briefly before returning to the ceramic cat. "I should like to see the display case in question, and then perhaps we might discuss who, precisely, would have access to such keys." Sir Edmund's lips tightened. "Of course. But I must emphasize, Mr. Poirot, the need for discretion. The trustees are meeting this afternoon, and I would prefer to have some answers before then." "Naturally," Poirot replied, rising to his feet. "Discretion is assured. But tell me, Sir Edmund, this little cat, do you recognize it? Is it an ancient artifact itself, or something more modern?" "That's just it," Dr. Hawthorne cut in, leaning forward eagerly. "It appears to be genuinely ancient, possibly from the late period 7th or 6th century BCE. Not particularly valuable on its own, but authentic nonetheless." "Curiouser and curiouser," I murmured. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Indeed, Hastings. A thief who steals treasures only to leave treasures in their place? This promises to be a most singular case." Chapter 2. 5 Suspects. We followed Sir Edmund and Dr. Hawthorne down the echoing corridors of the British Museum, past glass cases containing treasures from civilizations long vanished. Miss Webb walked slightly apart from our group, her quick, efficient steps betraying a certain tension that Poirot, I noticed, observed with interest. The Egyptian gallery was cordoned off with a discreet velvet rope, behind which several anxious-looking attendants stood guard. Sir Edmund nodded to them as we approached, and they stepped aside to allow our party through. "We've touched nothing since the discovery this morning," Dr. Hawthorne explained, twisting his moustache as he led us toward a central display case. "The public has been told the gallery is closed for routine maintenance." The display case in question stood in the center of the room, illuminated by carefully positioned lights that now shone down on emptiness, or rather not complete emptiness. The small ceramic cat sat alone where a collection of figurines had once been. Poirot circled the case with meticulous attention, his head tilted as he examined it from every angle. He bent down, his face mere inches from the glass, eyes narrowed. "You observe something, Poirot?" I asked, trying to see what had caught his attention. "Perhaps Hastings, perhaps," he murmured, straightening up. "Tell me, Sir Edmund, who precisely would have access to the keys for this case?" Sir Edmund cleared his throat. "That would be a very limited number of people. Myself, of course, Dr. Hawthorne and Miss Webb, Lord Pemberton as the trustee overseeing the Egyptian collection, and currently Professor Wilkinson, who is conducting research on our late-period artifacts." "And Mrs. Cartwright?" Miss Webb added quietly. Dr. Hawthorne frowned. "Mrs. Cartwright's consultant status doesn't officially grant her access." "No, but her late husband left her a set of master keys which were never returned to the museum," Miss Webb pointed out, her grey eyes steady despite the curator's evident displeasure at her comment. "I see," Poirot said thoughtfully, his fingertips pressed together. "I should like to speak with each of these individuals. But first," he gestured to the case. "May I?" Sir Edmund nodded to a nearby attendant, who stepped forward with a ring of keys. The case was carefully unlocked, and Poirot leaned in to examine the ceramic cat more closely, taking care not to touch it. "Most curious," he murmured. "And the peacock figurines? They were of great value, you say?" "Inestimable," Dr. Hawthorne replied, his voice reverent. 6 small statuettes, gold with lapis lazuli and turquoise inlay, from the reign of Amenhotep III. They've been in the museum's collection for over 70 years. Poirot straightened up and turned to face us. I shall need a complete description of these missing pieces, photographs if available, and details of when they were last verified to be in the case. Of course, Sir Edmund nodded. We'll provide everything. But Mr. Poirot, he lowered his voice. Discretion is paramount. The trustees meet at 4 o'clock, and Lord Pemberton in particular will be difficult if we don't have some answers by then. I understand, Poirot replied, his eyes returning to the display case. Now perhaps I might meet these people with access to the keys. Lord Pemberton is already in the building, Sir Edmund said. He arrived shortly after the discovery was made, and Professor Wilkinson should be in the research room. Miss Webb, would you be so kind as to fetch them and see if Mrs. Cartwright can be reached by telephone? Miss Webb nodded and departed with quick, precise steps that echoed on the marble floor. There is one other thing, Mr. Poirot, Dr. Hawthorne said, glancing at Sir Edmund as if seeking permission. The dust. The dust. Poirot's eyebrows rose with interest. Yes. You see, there's a very specific pattern of dust around where the peacock figurines stood. It's unusual. Not what one would expect if the pieces were simply lifted out. Poirot's eyes lit up. Show me, if you please. Dr. Hawthorne carefully opened the case again and pointed to what appeared to my untrained eye as merely a slightly uneven distribution of the fine dust that inevitably settles in even the most meticulously kept museum. Poirot, however, bent close, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar excitement I knew so well. Yes, he breathed. Most illuminating. Before he could elaborate, the sound of approaching footsteps made us all turn. Miss Webb had returned, accompanied by 2 men. Lord Pemberton, Professor Wilkinson. Sir Edmund made the introductions. This is Hercule Poirot, the private detective, and his associate, Captain Hastings. Lord Richard Pemberton was a tall, aristocratic figure with silvering hair and the languid confidence of the English upper classes. He extended his hand to Poirot with a faint air of condescension. Ah, the Belgian detective, he remarked. Sir Edmund mentioned he was calling in external expertise, though I'm not entirely convinced that Scotland Yard wouldn't be more appropriate. The police will be notified in due course, my lord, Sir Edmund assured him quickly. But Mr. Poirot's discretion and expertise in matters of art theft make him ideally suited to our situation. If you say so, Lord Pemberton replied, though his tone suggested scepticism. Professor James Wilkinson, by contrast, seemed genuinely pleased to meet Poirot. A shorter, bespectacled man with an air of intense scholarly focus, he shook Poirot's hand with enthusiasm. An honour, Mr. Poirot, he said warmly. I've followed your cases with great interest, particularly the affair of the forged Mesopotamian cylinder seals at the Louvre last year. Brilliantly resolved. You are most kind, Poirot acknowledged, with a slight bow. Professor Wilkinson is visiting from Cambridge, Sir Edmund explained. He's been conducting research on our late-period collection for the past 3 months. A remarkable collection, the professor agreed. These peacock figurines, in particular, were extraordinary examples of New Kingdom craftsmanship. Their loss is incalculable. I noticed that he spoke of the figurines in the past tense, as if they were already gone forever. Mrs. Cartwright sends her apologies, Miss Webb interjected. She is currently at her home in Kensington, but can be here within the hour. Excellent, Poirot nodded. Now, perhaps we might use an office or private room where I may speak with each of you individually. Sir Edmund led us to a small conference room adjacent to the Egyptian gallery, where Poirot began his interviews. I sat slightly apart, observing as each person entered and left, noting the subtle changes in Poirot's demeanour as he gathered information. Dr. Latimer, the Egyptologist, arrived shortly thereafter, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers who seemed distracted and ill at ease. From fragments of conversation, I gathered he had financial troubles, having recently made some unfortunate investments. Mrs. Evelyn Cartwright arrived last, a handsome widow of perhaps 50, elegantly dressed and self-possessed. She had been married to the previous curator, a fact she mentioned several times during her interview, emphasizing her continued connection to the museum's Egyptian collection. As the interviews progressed, I found myself studying the interactions between the suspects when they thought themselves unobserved. Lord Pemberton and Mrs. Cartwright exchanged glances of what appeared to be mutual dislike. Professor Wilkinson seemed particularly attentive to Miss Webb, who maintained a polite but distinct reserve. Dr. Latimer repeatedly checked his watch, a nervous habit that did not escape Poirot's notice. By late afternoon, Poirot had spoken with each person individually and examined all the documentation relating to the peacock figurines. We were preparing to meet with Inspector Japp, who had been discreetly informed of the situation, when Poirot drew me aside. "You have been observing Hastings?" he asked quietly. "Yes, though I'm not sure I've noticed anything of value," I admitted. "They all seem to have reasons to be nervous, but then who wouldn't be under the circumstances?" "Precisely," Poirot nodded. "But nervousness takes different forms, does it not? The twisting of a moustache, the checking of a watch, the careful maintenance of distance." He tapped his temple significantly. "The little grey cells, they are beginning to arrange the facts." He glanced back at the Egyptian gallery, where the empty display case stood like a silent accusation. The ceramic cat, now carefully removed for examination, had left its own mysterious message, one that Poirot seemed determined to decipher. Chapter 3. A Midnight Discovery. Inspector Japp arrived at the British Museum just as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen. His familiar, somewhat battered figure provided a comforting contrast to the refined atmosphere of the museum officials. He greeted Poirot with the gruff affection born of their long association. "Well, Poirot, seems you've landed yourself another pretty puzzle," he remarked, shaking hands with both of us. "Sir Edmund has given me the basic facts, but I'd appreciate hearing your thoughts." "All in good time, my friend," Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling. "First, perhaps you might share what the official police investigation has discovered. The fingerprints, the night watchman's report?" Japp consulted his notebook. "Not much to go on, I'm afraid. No unusual fingerprints on the display case, only those we'd expect from museum staff. Night watchman reports nothing out of the ordinary during his rounds. Security system wasn't triggered. It's as if those peacock things simply vanished." "Not vanished, mon ami," Poirot corrected. "Replaced. And that is most significant, is it not? The thief did not merely take, he substituted." Japp frowned. "This ceramic cat business, bit theatrical, isn't it? Like something out of a penny dreadful." "Perhaps." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Or perhaps it has a meaning beyond the theatrical. I should like to examine the night watchman's logs for the past week, if that could be arranged." "Already requested them," Japp nodded. "Should have them within the hour." Sir Edmund, who had been hovering nearby, cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, the trustees are assembled in the boardroom. They're expecting an update on the situation." Poirot smiled reassuringly. "Then we shall not keep them waiting, though I fear I have more questions than answers at this early stage." The trustees' meeting was held in an imposing room lined with portraits of distinguished-looking men from previous centuries. Lord Pemberton dominated the proceedings from his position at the head of the table, flanked by 4 other trustees whose names I promptly forgot after hasty introductions. "This is an unprecedented situation," Lord Pemberton declared, fixing Poirot with a penetrating stare. I need hardly emphasize the value of the stolen artifacts or the potential damage to the museum's reputation should this become public knowledge. I understand completely, Poirot replied with a slight bow. Rest assured that Captain Hastings and I, in cooperation with Inspector Japp, are pursuing several promising lines of inquiry. This was news to me, and I suspected to Japp as well, but we both maintained expressions of confident agreement. "You have a theory, then?" one of the other trustees asked eagerly. "In a case such as this, theories are premature," Poirot replied diplomatically. "At present I am gathering facts. The dust pattern on the display case, for instance, suggests that the figurines were not simply lifted out, but rather removed in a very specific manner." "Dust?" Lord Pemberton interrupted, his tone dismissive. "Surely that's inconsequential." "In the world of detection, my lord, nothing is inconsequential," Poirot replied mildly, though I detected a hint of steel beneath his polite tone. "The smallest detail may prove illuminating." The meeting continued for another half hour, with the trustees pressing for immediate action and Poirot gently but firmly explaining the necessity for methodical investigation. When we finally emerged, Japp was waiting with the night watchman's logs. "Nothing unusual reported," he said, handing the leather-bound book to Poirot. "But there's something else you should know. The ceramic cat has been examined by our experts. It's genuinely ancient, late-period Egyptian, just as Dr. Hawthorne suggested, worth a fair bit itself, though nothing compared to those peacock figurines." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "A thief who leaves behind valuable artifacts. Most unusual, is it not?" Dr. Hawthorne approached us, his round face flushed with evident anxiety. "Mr. Poirot, might I have a word, in private?" We retreated to his office, a cluttered space lined with bookshelves and featuring a large desk covered with papers, photographs, and various archaeological specimens. Dr. Hawthorne closed the door carefully behind us. "There's something I should have mentioned earlier," he began, twisting his moustache nervously. "I've been conducting a private inventory of the Egyptian collection over the past few months. There have been discrepancies." "What kind of discrepancies?" Poirot asked sharply. "Small items missing, replaced with authentic but less valuable pieces," Dr. Hawthorne explained, his voice lowered despite the closed door. "I didn't want to alarm anyone until I was certain it wasn't simply an inventory error. But after today's incident—" "Why did you not report this to Sir Edmund?" Japp demanded. Dr. Hawthorne's fingers drummed anxiously on his desk. "I had hoped to resolve the matter quietly, and to be frank, I wasn't entirely sure whom I could trust." "And now?" Poirot prompted. "Now I fear this theft of the peacock figurines may be connected to my earlier discoveries," Dr. Hawthorne replied. "I've documented everything in my personal diary." He pulled open a desk drawer and removed a leather-bound notebook. "Here, you can see the entries dating back several months." As Dr. Hawthorne began to explain his findings, a knock at the door interrupted us. Miss Webb entered, her composed expression at odds with the urgency in her voice. "Dr. Hawthorne, Sir Edmund requests your presence immediately. Professor Wilkinson believes he may have found a reference to the ceramic cat in an obscure text on Bastet worship," she announced. Dr. Hawthorne rose quickly. "I'll be right there. Mr. Poirot, please feel free to examine the diary. It may contain information relevant to your investigation." He hurried from the room, leaving us with the notebook. Poirot immediately began to leaf through it, his expression growing increasingly interested. "Look, Hastings," he murmured, pointing to a series of entries. "References to the cat's whiskers appear repeatedly, often with dates and catalogue numbers." "Code of some sort?" I suggested. "Perhaps," Poirot agreed. "Though why a museum curator would need to code entries in his private diary is itself a question of interest, is it not?" We spent the next hour examining the diary while Japp arranged for a police presence at the museum overnight, discreetly at Sir Edmund's insistence. As evening fell, the museum emptied of visitors and most staff. Poirot, however, seemed reluctant to leave. "There is something more to be learned here, Hastings," he explained, pacing slowly around the Egyptian gallery. "Something that becomes visible only when all is quiet, perhaps?" His instinct proved correct. Shortly after midnight, as we sat with Japp in Sir Edmund's office reviewing the case, a commotion from the direction of the Egyptian gallery brought us all to our feet. We rushed toward the sound, following a police constable who had been stationed nearby. The sight that greeted us was one I shall never forget. Dr. Hawthorne lay sprawled across the now empty display case, his body slumped awkwardly, one arm dangling toward the floor. In his hand, clutched tightly even in death, was a single peacock feather, iridescent blue and green, catching the emergency lights that had automatically activated. Japp bent over the body, his experienced fingers checking for a pulse he clearly didn't expect to find. "Dead," he confirmed grimly. "And not from natural causes unless I miss my guess." Poirot circled the scene with careful steps, his eyes missing nothing. He bent to examine the peacock feather without touching it, then studied the position of the body with intense concentration. Something on the floor caught his attention, a small white pill that had rolled a short distance from where Dr. Hawthorne had fallen. "We must secure this area immediately." Poirot straightened up, his voice sharp with authority. "No one touches anything until forensic experts arrive. And Japp, I suggest we gather all our suspects. Immediately." "In the middle of the night," Japp objected. "Death keeps no regular hours, my friend," Poirot replied solemnly. "And neither, it seems, does our killer." While Japp arranged for Dr. Hawthorne's body to be examined and the scene properly documented, I studied Poirot's face. I knew that expression well, the slightly narrowed eyes, the pursed lips. He had seen something significant that the rest of us had missed. "What is it, Poirot?" I asked quietly. "What have you noticed?" He turned to me, his expression grave, yet somehow animated by the intellectual challenge. "Several things, Hastings. The position of the body, most unnatural. The peacock feather, where did it come from? And the diary." He paused, glancing back toward Dr. Hawthorne's office. "The diary that may now be the voice of a dead man." As dawn broke over London, casting pale light through the museum's high windows, we had established one fact beyond doubt. The case of the missing peacock figurines had escalated from theft to murder. Chapter 4. Hidden Messages. The news of Dr. Hawthorne's death spread through the museum like ripples in still water, transforming the atmosphere from one of anxious concern to genuine fear. Sir Edmund, his face ashen, had arranged for an emergency meeting room where we could question those involved while the police forensic team examined the scene of the crime. "Murdered," Lord Pemberton repeated the word with evident disbelief, tugging at his signet ring. "In the British Museum, this is beyond belief, beyond tolerance." "The initial examination suggests poison," Inspector Japp explained, his notebook open before him. "We'll know more after the autopsy, but the medical examiner thinks it was something fast-acting. The peacock feather found in his hand is most peculiar. Laboratory is checking it now." Poirot, who had been sitting silently with fingertips pressed together, now addressed the assembled group. "Before we proceed, I must ask whether anyone noticed Dr. Hawthorne's movements yesterday evening. When was he last seen alive?" he inquired, his eyes moving from face to face. "I saw him in the manuscript room around 6. Professor Wilkinson volunteered, cleaning his spectacles with a handkerchief. He seemed quite agitated, searching through some obscure texts on Egyptian religious practices. He was looking for references to cat symbolism." Miss Webb added, her normally composed features strained. "After you spoke with him, Mr. Poirot, he seemed preoccupied, said he needed to check something urgently." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And after 6 o'clock?" A museum security guard, who had been summoned to the meeting, raised his hand tentatively. "I saw Dr. Hawthorne at approximately 9:30, sir. He was returning to the Egyptian gallery. Said he'd forgotten some notes. I offered to accompany him, but he declined." "Alone in the gallery, then?" Japp murmured, making a note. "Around the time our medical examiner estimates for the time of death." While Japp continued questioning the others, Poirot beckoned me to follow him into the corridor. "Hastings, we must examine the curator's diary more thoroughly," he whispered urgently. "These references to the cat's whiskers, I believe they may be central to our mystery." We retreated to a small office that had been assigned to us, where Dr. Hawthorne's diary lay on the desk alongside photographs of the peacock figurines and the ceramic cat. Poirot settled himself at the desk and began to leaf through the diary methodically, occasionally making small sounds of interest. I paced the room, my mind turning over the bizarre sequence of events. "The question that puzzles me," I said, thinking aloud, "is why replace valuable artifacts with less valuable ones? Why not simply steal them outright?" "Precisely, Hastings," Poirot nodded approvingly. "And why leave this ceramic cat, itself a genuine antiquity, in place of the peacock figurines? There is purpose here, method." He returned to the diary, copying out certain entries onto a separate sheet of paper. "Look here," he indicated several dates spanning the past 3 months. Each entry includes a catalogue number, a reference to the cat's whiskers, and a cryptic notation, UV confirms. "UV?" I frowned. "Ultraviolet, perhaps?" "Perhaps indeed." Poirot's eyes lit up. "An excellent suggestion, Hastings. Ultraviolet light is sometimes used in museums to examine artifacts for details not visible to the naked eye." Our discussion was interrupted by a knock at the door. Miss Webb entered, carrying a stack of files. "Sir Edmund asked me to bring you these," she explained, placing them on the desk. "Complete acquisition records for all Egyptian artifacts obtained in the past 5 years, as Mr. Poirot requested." Poirot thanked her, but as she turned to leave, he raised a hand. "A moment, if you please, Miss Webb. You worked closely with Dr. Hawthorne, did you not?" She hesitated in the doorway, one hand still on the doorknob. "For 3 years, yes." "And these coded references in his diary, the cat's whiskers, do they signify anything to you?" Poirot asked, watching her face carefully. A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or anxiety, crossed her features before she composed herself. "I believe it was a personal cataloguing system. Dr. Hawthorne was methodical in his own way, though his systems were not always obvious to others." "I see," Poirot nodded. "And his relationship with the other staff members? Were there tensions, perhaps?" Miss Webb's knuckles whitened slightly on the doorknob. Dr. Hawthorne was not an easy man to work with. Brilliant, certainly, but demanding. He and Lord Pemberton often disagreed about acquisition priorities. "And Professor Wilkinson?" I asked, recalling the attention the professor had paid Miss Webb. A slight flush coloured her cheeks. "Professor Wilkinson collaborated with Dr. Hawthorne on several research papers. Their relationship was professional." She straightened her shoulders. "If that's all, gentlemen, I have inventory lists to compile for the police." After she had gone, Poirot tapped the diary thoughtfully. "She knows more than she is saying, that one?" "You think she's involved?" I asked, surprised. "I think she is afraid," Poirot replied. "But of what, or whom, remains to be seen." We spent the next hour examining the acquisition records, comparing them with the dates and catalogue numbers in Dr. Hawthorne's diary. A pattern gradually emerged. The items referenced were all small artifacts, valuable but not spectacular, acquired through various donors and dealers over the past 5 years. "I believe," Poirot said slowly, "that Dr. Hawthorne had discovered something systematic, something that troubled him greatly." He reached for his overcoat. "Come, Hastings, we must speak with Sir Edmund about obtaining a particular piece of equipment." Sir Edmund was visibly exhausted when we found him in his office, fielding telephone calls from trustees and press alike. "An ultraviolet lamp?" he repeated when Poirot made his request. "Yes, we have several in the conservation department, but why—" "If I am correct," Poirot explained, "Dr. Hawthorne was using ultraviolet light to examine certain artifacts. I believe we may find what he discovered if we do the same." 30 minutes later, we were in a darkened conservation laboratory. The ceramic cat sat on a workbench before us, while a technician prepared the ultraviolet lamp. "UV light can reveal details invisible under normal conditions," the technician explained. "Repairs, overpainting, certain minerals that fluoresce, even modern adhesives or materials." The lights were extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. Then the UV lamp was switched on, casting an eerie purple glow. The ceramic cat looked different under this light, ordinary in most respects, but along the base, previously invisible markings glowed with a faint greenish tinge. "Hieroglyphs," the technician murmured. "But these aren't original to the piece. They've been added relatively recently, using a material that only shows under UV. Poirot leaned forward, examining the markings with intense concentration. "Can you photograph this? And perhaps translate the hieroglyphs?" "The photography is no problem," the technician nodded. "For translation, Professor Wilkinson would be your best option." "No," Poirot said sharply. "For now this discovery remains between us. Perhaps there is someone external who might assist." "Dr. Morris at the university," the technician suggested. "He's retired now, but still consults occasionally." "Excellent." Poirot straightened up. "Make the necessary arrangements, if you would be so kind. And now," he turned to me, "I believe we should examine some of the other artifacts mentioned in Dr. Hawthorne's diary." By late afternoon, we had examined 5 artifacts, each showing similar hidden markings when exposed to ultraviolet light. Dr. Morris, a stooped, elderly man with remarkable energy, had arrived to translate. "Fascinating," he muttered, poring over the photographs. "These are modern inscriptions made to look ancient, but the hieroglyphs themselves are genuine. They appear to be catalogue numbers, a cross-referencing system of some kind." "Catalogue numbers to what?" Japp asked, having joined us for this revelation. "That, my friend, is the question we must answer," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of intellectual pursuit. "And I believe the answer lies in Dr. Hawthorne's coded references to the cat's whiskers." As we left the conservation laboratory, I noticed that Poirot seemed unusually thoughtful, even preoccupied. "You have a theory?" I prompted. "Not yet a theory, Hastings, but the beginnings of one," he admitted. "Consider. Artifacts systematically marked with invisible codes, a curator who discovers this and begins his own investigation, only to be silenced. A valuable collection replaced not with worthless fakes, but with another genuine antiquity, the ceramic cat." He tapped his forehead. "The little grey cells, they begin to arrange the facts, but the picture is still incomplete." We turned a corner to find Lord Pemberton and Professor Wilkinson engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion, though they fell silent at our approach. The tension between them was palpable, hanging in the air like the dust motes that danced in the museum's filtered light. Later that evening, as I returned from a quick dinner in the museum cafe, I passed Miss Webb's office. Through the partly open door, I glimpsed her examining something on her desk, something that gleamed with the unmistakable iridescence of a peacock feather. She looked up suddenly, her eyes meeting mine, and hastily swept the feather into a drawer. When I reported this to Poirot, he merely nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. Outside, darkness had fallen over London, but inside the museum, lights burned late as the investigation continued. Somewhere among the ancient treasures and their modern keepers, a killer waited, and Poirot was steadily closing in. Chapter 5. The Cat's Whiskers. Morning arrived with a thin drizzle that sheeted the museum's windows and cast a gloomy pall over the proceedings. Poirot and I had taken rooms at a small hotel nearby, allowing us to return to the museum early. We found Inspector Japp already there, looking haggard but determined. "Preliminary autopsy report," he announced without preamble, waving a folder. Hawthorne was poisoned all right. Some sort of fast-acting compound the lab boys are still identifying. Administered within an hour of death, they reckon. And there's something else. He lowered his voice. That peacock feather? It had been treated with a contact poison. Merely handling it would have transferred a lethal dose to his skin. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Most ingenious. The murderer ensures the victim handles something seemingly innocuous yet deadly. But why a peacock feather, I wondered. The symbolism seems rather pointed. Precisely, Hastings. Poirot nodded approvingly. Our killer has a sense of the dramatic. The peacock figurines are stolen. The curator dies clutching a peacock feather. It is, how do you say? Theatrical, Japp supplied. Indeed. And that suggests someone with not merely criminal intent, but a desire to create an impression, to demonstrate their cleverness, Poirot mused, his fingers delicately stroking his moustache. We made our way to the small office that had been set aside for our use. The photographs of the UV-illuminated artifacts were spread across the desk, alongside Dr. Morris's preliminary translations. I have arranged for Dr. Fenwick to join us this morning, Poirot announced, consulting his pocket watch. He is an expert on ancient Egyptian symbolism, particularly as it relates to religious practices. You think this has something to do with religious artifacts? I asked, puzzled. I think, my friend, that the choice of a cat figurine is significant beyond mere convenience, Poirot replied. In ancient Egypt, cats were sacred animals, particularly associated with the goddess Baste. They were protectors against evil and guardians of what? I prompted when he paused. Of treasures, Poirot finished, his eyes gleaming. The cat was often depicted as guarding the pharaoh's treasures against rats and snakes, vermin that would damage or steal what was precious. Is it not curious that our thief leaves behind a guardian's symbol? Our discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Edmund, accompanied by a white-haired gentleman who carried himself with the confident bearing of an academic. Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, this is Dr. Fenwick, Sir Edmund introduced us. He's kindly agreed to consult on the symbolic aspects of our case. Dr. Fenwick clasped Poirot's hand warmly. Delighted to assist, though the circumstances are most unfortunate. I understand there's some question about a ceramic cat. Poirot quickly brought Dr. Fenwick up to speed on the case, showing him the photographs of the cat figurine and the UV-revealed markings. The older man examined them with obvious fascination. Extraordinary, he murmured. The cat itself appears to be an authentic late-period piece, circa 7th century BCE, a representation of Bastet in her protective aspect. But these markings... He tapped the photographs of the hieroglyphs visible under UV light. These are modern additions, though skillfully rendered in the ancient style. What do they signify? Poirot asked. They appear to be a form of cataloguing or inventory notation, Dr. Fenwick explained. But there's something else here, a phrase that repeats across several artifacts. It translates roughly as that which whiskers reveal, or perhaps secrets of the whiskers. The cat's whiskers, I exclaimed. Precisely. Poirot nodded, his expression triumphant. And now we begin to understand Dr. Hawthorne's coded references. He had discovered these hidden markings and was documenting them systematically. As we discussed the implications, The door opened to admit Professor Wilkinson, who looked surprised to find Dr. Fenwick present. "Ah, Professor Wilkinson," Sir Edmund gestured him in. "Dr. Fenwick is assisting with the symbolic aspects of the cat figurine." "Is he indeed?" Professor Wilkinson's tone was perfectly polite, but I detected a certain tension in his shoulders. I would have been happy to provide that expertise myself. "Your work on late-period artifacts is renowned, of course," Dr. Fenwick replied smoothly. "But my focus on religious symbolism is perhaps more directly relevant in this instance." The two academics exchanged the sort of smiles that suggested a long-standing professional rivalry. "Mr. Poirot," Professor Wilkinson turned to address him directly, "I understand you've been examining artifacts under ultraviolet light?" "News travels quickly in the museum," Poirot observed mildly. "Miss Webb mentioned it," Wilkinson admitted. "She seemed concerned that handling artifacts without a curator present might violate protocol." "Rest assured, Professor, all examinations were conducted by qualified conservation staff," Sir Edmund interjected hastily. Poirot watched this exchange with interest before changing the subject. "Professor, in your expert opinion, would it be possible for someone to systematically replace genuine artifacts with high-quality forgeries without detection during routine inspections?" Wilkinson's expression remained carefully neutral. "Theoretically, yes, with sufficient skill and knowledge of the collection's authentication procedures, it could be done, especially with smaller, less frequently studied pieces. And such forgeries, they would be extremely valuable on the black market, yes?" Poirot pressed. "Undoubtedly," Wilkinson nodded, "particularly if they came with convincing provenance." After Wilkinson and Sir Edmund departed, Poirot turned to Dr. Fenwick. "Tell me, Doctor, this phrase, by that which whiskers reveal, could it have a more specific meaning in Egyptological terms?" The older man considered for a moment. "In some contexts, cats' whiskers were believed to detect invisible dangers or truths. There are references in certain texts to the whiskers of Bastet, revealing what is hidden from ordinary sight." He smiled slightly. "Rather fitting, considering these markings are only visible under special light." Just then, Miss Webb appeared at the door, a folder clutched in her hands. "Mr. Poirot, I've found something in Dr. Hawthorne's personal files that might interest you." She stepped into the room, hesitating slightly upon seeing Dr. Fenwick, then continued. "These are photographs of several artifacts taken under ultraviolet light. They date back nearly 6 months, well before the entries in his diary began." Poirot examined the photographs with evident interest. "Miss Webb, did Dr. Hawthorne ever mention concerns about forgeries in the collection?" Her grey eyes widened slightly. "Not directly, no, but about 3 months ago he began insisting on personally overseeing all new acquisitions. He also requested additional funding for advanced authentication techniques, which Lord Pemberton denied." She placed the folder on the desk. "There's something else. Dr. Hawthorne had been meeting privately with Mrs. Cartwright. I believe they were discussing concerns about the collection's authenticity." "And how did you come by this information?" Poirot inquired gently. A flush coloured her cheeks. "I overheard them once. They were in Dr. Hawthorne's office and their voices were raised. Mrs. Cartwright said something about responsibility to donors and her husband's legacy. After Miss Webb left, I turned to Poirot. "Do you think Mrs. Cartwright could be involved? She seems the least likely suspect to me." "In matters of crime, Hastings, likelihood is often misleading," Poirot replied. "But it is significant that Mrs. Cartwright, as the widow of the previous curator, would feel a personal connection to the integrity of the collection. Our next step was to interview Mrs. Cartwright herself, whom we found in the museum's tea room, an elegant space where staff could escape the public areas. She received us with composed grace, though I noticed that her fingers trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. "You wish to speak with me, Mr. Poirot?" she inquired. "Indeed, madame," Poirot replied. "I understand you were acquainted with Dr. Hawthorne through your late husband's connection to the museum." "Geoffrey was my husband's protégé," she confirmed. "After Richard died, Geoffrey often consulted me about the collection, particularly pieces acquired during my husband's tenure. And recently, these consultations became more frequent, did they not?" Poirot suggested. A flicker of wariness crossed her face. "Yes. Geoffrey had concerns about forgeries in the collection?" Poirot asked directly. Mrs. Cartwright glanced around before leaning forward. "Not just forgeries," she said in a lowered voice. "He believed there was a systematic operation, genuine artifacts being replaced with convincing fakes, with the originals sold on the black market." "And did he have proof of this?" I asked. "He was gathering evidence," she replied. "Using ultraviolet light to examine artifacts, he found hidden markings, a sort of signature, left by the forger, perhaps as a private joke. He called it the cat's whiskers." As we left Mrs. Cartwright, Poirot was uncharacteristically silent, his brow furrowed in concentration. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through the high windows of the museum, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. "We must speak with Dr. Latimer," he announced suddenly. "His expertise in authentication techniques may prove invaluable." Dr. Latimer was found in the conservation laboratory, examining a small statuette under a powerful magnifying glass. His fingers bore fresh ink stains, and the nervous energy I had noted before seemed even more pronounced. "Ultraviolet authentication?" he repeated when Poirot inquired. "Yes, it's a standard technique for detecting modern additions or repairs to ancient artifacts. The materials fluoresce differently under UV light." He set down the magnifying glass, his movements jerky. Dr. Hawthorne had become quite interested in the technique recently. "And would such examinations be documented in the official conservation records?" Poirot asked. Dr. Latimer hesitated. "Normally, yes, but if Dr. Hawthorne was conducting unofficial examinations, perhaps to avoid alerting someone, he might have kept separate records." As we departed, Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "The pieces begin to fit together, Hastings. Dr. Hawthorne discovers a pattern of substitutions, conducts his own investigation, and documents his findings in code. Someone realizes he has discovered their scheme and silences him, but they make one crucial mistake." "What's that?" I asked, intrigued. "They leave behind evidence only visible to those who know where and how to look," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of discovery. "Just like the cat's whiskers in the ancient legend, revealing what is hidden to ordinary sight." Chapter 6. Illuminating Evidence. By late afternoon, Poirot had arranged for the Egyptian gallery to be closed to the public. A team of conservation specialists had been assembled along with several portable ultraviolet lamps. Sir Edmund, looking increasingly strained, had reluctantly agreed to the examination of the entire Egyptian collection. "I must emphasize the need for discretion," he had insisted, tugging nervously at his collar. "The trustees, particularly Lord Pemberton, are already concerned about damage to the museum's reputation." "My dear Sir Edmund," Poirot had replied soothingly, "discretion is the very foundation of my method, but we cannot allow concerns for reputation to impede the pursuit of truth, especially when murder is involved." The examination proceeded methodically, with each artifact being carefully documented before being subjected to the revealing glow of ultraviolet light. Poirot observed the proceedings with intense concentration, while I kept notes on which items revealed hidden markings. Dr. Fenwick, who had remained to assist, let out a small exclamation as he examined a small alabaster jar. "Here, another one, the same hieroglyphic sequence, visible only under UV. I peered over his shoulder at the faint greenish markings that glowed on the base of the jar. "That makes 7 artifacts so far with these hidden inscriptions," I noted, adding it to our growing list. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And each one relatively small, easily transported, yet valuable. Perfect candidates for substitution." Inspector Japp, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped forward. "So we're looking at a systematic forgery operation, then? Original pieces replaced with fakes, with these UV markings as some sort of signature?" "Not precisely, my friend," Poirot corrected. "The pieces being substituted appear to be genuine antiquities themselves, just less valuable ones, modified to resemble more significant pieces. It is a scheme of remarkable cunning." "But what's the point of leaving a signature that can only be seen under special lighting?" Japp frowned. "Seems like unnecessary risk." "Pride, perhaps," Dr. Fenwick suggested. "Many criminals cannot resist the temptation to sign their work, even if the signature remains hidden to most." "Or a private joke," I added, recalling Mrs. Cartwright's words. "Or," Poirot said slowly, "a form of inventory control. A way to keep track of which pieces have been substituted and which remain to be replaced." As the examination continued, Lord Pemberton arrived, his aristocratic features arranged in an expression of displeasure. He surveyed the scene with evident disapproval. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, addressing Sir Edmund. "I was informed that an investigation was underway, not that the entire Egyptian collection would be subjected to irregular handling." "Every precaution is being taken, my lord," Sir Edmund assured him hastily. "The conservation team is following strict protocols." "This is highly irregular," Lord Pemberton insisted, his voice rising. "As chairman of the trustees, I must protest this disruption to museum operations." Poirot, who had been examining a small figurine, looked up with a mild expression that I recognized as deceptive in its placidity. "Lord Pemberton, surely the integrity of the museum's collection is of paramount importance. Dr. Hawthorne died investigating discrepancies. We merely continue his work." "Hawthorne was becoming obsessive," Lord Pemberton dismissed with a wave of his hand, "always seeing conspiracies and forgeries where none existed. I had warned Sir Edmund that the man's behaviour was becoming problematic." "Problematic in what way, precisely?" Poirot inquired, his tone conversational, but his eyes sharp. Lord Pemberton hesitated momentarily. He was making accusations without sufficient evidence, suggesting improprieties in the acquisition process. It was becoming disruptive. "And yet," Poirot observed quietly, "we have now found 7 artifacts bearing hidden markings, suggesting his concerns were not without foundation." Before Lord Pemberton could respond, Professor Wilkinson entered the gallery carrying a leather portfolio. He paused, sensing the tension, then approached our group. "Mr. Poirot, I've been considering our earlier conversation about forgeries," he began, seemingly oblivious to Lord Pemberton's glare. "I took the liberty of checking several catalogues from other museums. There's something you should see." He opened the portfolio on a nearby table, spreading out several photographs. "Now, these are items from the Metropolitan Museum in New York, the Louvre in Paris, and the Egyptian Museum in Berlin. All small artifacts, similar to those in our collection, all acquired within the past 5 years." Poirot examined the photographs with interest. "You believe these may also be substitutions?" "I can't be certain without examining them directly," Professor Wilkinson admitted. "But the stylistic similarities are striking. If the same forger is at work, this could be an international operation." Lord Pemberton made a sound of derision. "Pure speculation. Really, Professor, I expect more scholarly rigour from someone of your standing." The 2 men locked eyes, and I sensed a history of antagonism between them that went beyond the current situation. "The evidence will speak for itself, my lord," Professor Wilkinson replied coolly. "Science relies on observation, not authority." As the tension between them simmered, Miss Webb entered, carrying a tray with several small artifacts. "These were in Dr. Hawthorne's office safe," she explained, placing them carefully on the examination table. "They're not listed in the official collection inventory." One of the conservation specialists immediately prepared to examine them under UV light. The first piece, a small scarab beetle carved from lapis lazuli, revealed no hidden markings. The second, a fragment of painted limestone, likewise showed nothing unusual. But the third item, a small gold amulet in the shape of an eye of Horus, lit up with the now familiar hieroglyphic sequence when placed under the UV lamp. "Curious," Poirot murmured. Dr. Hawthorne had separated this piece from the collection. Why? "Perhaps he was building a case," I suggested, "gathering evidence of the substitutions." "Or perhaps," Dr. Fenwick interjected, examining the amulet closely, "he recognized this as one of the substituted pieces. The workmanship is exquisite, but there are subtle anomalies in the style that suggest it may not be from the period it purports to represent." The examination continued well into the evening, with 19 artifacts eventually identified as bearing the hidden UV markings. Poirot had each one photographed, carefully documenting the pattern of substitutions. "There is something else we must try," he announced, as the team was preparing to conclude for the night. "The peacock figurines, we have been assuming they were removed from the museum entirely, but what if, like these other pieces, they were simply replaced?" "But the display case was empty," I objected, "except for the ceramic cat." "The display case for the peacock figurines was empty," Poirot corrected me. "But if our forger's method is to substitute less valuable pieces for more valuable ones, then, logically, the peacock figurines might still be in the museum disguised as less significant artifacts," I exclaimed, catching his meaning. "Precisely, Hastings," Poirot nodded approvingly. "We must examine the entire Egyptian collection again, this time looking not for hidden markings but for peacock imagery or symbolism." Dr. Fenwick's eyes widened. "There are dozens of artifacts that incorporate bird imagery, the ibis, the falcon, the vulture, all sacred birds in ancient Egypt." "But not the peacock," Poirot pointed out. "The peacock was not indigenous to Egypt, though it was known through trade with India and Persia. Its appearance in Egyptian art would be distinctive, unusual." The search began anew, with everyone now alert for any representation of peacocks or similar birds. Progress was slow, with each artifact requiring careful examination under both normal and ultraviolet light. It was nearly midnight when Dr. Latimer, who had joined the search after dinner, called out from a corner where he had been examining a collection of small, votive offerings. "I think I've found something," he announced, his voice tense with excitement. "These 6 small bird figurines catalogued as ibis representations, under UV light, the paint reveals different pigmentation and the shape of the tail feathers." He looked up, his face pale in the ghostly purple glow. "These aren't ibis figures at all. They're peacocks disguised with modern paint that appears authentic under normal light." Poirot moved swiftly to examine the figurines. "Gold with lapis lazuli and turquoise inlay," he murmured, studying the areas where the overlying paint had become transparent under UV light. "Hidden in plain sight, merely disguised rather than removed." "And look," Dr. Fenwick added, pointing to barely visible marks on the base of each figurine. The same hieroglyphic sequence, the cat's whiskers signature. While the others crowded around this remarkable discovery, I noticed Lord Pemberton standing slightly apart, his face expressionless yet somehow rigid. His hand moved to his waistcoat pocket, then away again, as if checking for something. Later, as we walked back to our hotel through the quiet London streets, Poirot seemed unusually pensive. "What troubles you?" I asked, noticing his furrowed brow. Surely finding the peacock figurines is a triumph? It is a step forward, yes, he acknowledged. But there remains the question of why the figurines were disguised rather than removed like other substituted pieces. And why was the ceramic cat left so prominently in their place? It is as if the thief wished to draw attention to their scheme, which contradicts the careful methodology displayed elsewhere. Perhaps the plan was interrupted, I suggested. Dr. Hawthorne might have discovered something that forced the thief to act hastily. Perhaps, Poirot nodded slowly. Or perhaps it was a deliberate change in strategy, a message of some kind. He tapped his forehead. The little grey cells, they are not yet satisfied with our explanation. Tomorrow, Hastings, we must examine the acquisition records more thoroughly. I believe the answer lies in the provenance of these artifacts, in who brought them to the museum, and how. The fog had descended, wrapping London in its muffling embrace. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck 1, its sonorous chimes seeming to count down the hours until morning would bring new revelations in our increasingly complex case. Chapter 7. A Pattern Emerges. Found us back at the British Museum, where Poirot had requested that all acquisition records for the Egyptian collections spanning the past decade be made available to us. A small office adjacent to Sir Edmund's had been converted into a temporary research room, with documents stacked in neat piles according to year. "We must be methodical, Hastings," Poirot declared, settling himself at the desk with the air of a general preparing for battle. "I have prepared a timeline of all artifacts bearing the hidden cat's whiskers marking. Now we must determine how and when these items came into the museum's possession." I took the chair opposite him, resigned to what promised to be a long day of painstaking documentation. "What exactly are we looking for?" I inquired, reaching for the first folder. "Patterns, my friend. Connections." Poirot spread his hands expressively. Who donated these items? Who authenticated them? Who handled their installation in the collection? If our theory is correct and genuine artifacts have been systematically replaced with lesser pieces, then someone with intimate knowledge of the museum's operations must be involved. We worked steadily through the morning, interrupted occasionally by museum staff bringing tea or additional records. By lunchtime, Poirot had constructed an elaborate chart on a large sheet of paper with names, dates, and catalogue numbers arranged in columns. "Observe, Hastings," he said, tapping the chart with a pencil. "Of the 19 artifacts bearing the hidden markings, 15 were acquired during the past 5 years. Of those 15, 12 came through the same dealer, Harrington and Sons." "That seems significant," I nodded, studying the chart. "Indeed. And who authorized these acquisitions? Who signed the authentication documents?" Poirot's finger moved to another column. "Lord Pemberton, in his capacity as trustee overseeing the Egyptian collection, approved everyone." "But surely that's his job," I pointed out. "It doesn't necessarily imply wrongdoing." "No, but it establishes opportunity," Poirot replied. "And now let us look at who conducted the initial authentications before the pieces were presented to the Acquisition Committee." His finger traced down yet another column. "Most interesting. Dr. Hawthorne himself authenticated several pieces, as did Professor Wilkinson during his visits. Dr. Latimer handled 2 during a period when Dr. Hawthorne was on sabbatical, and," he paused dramatically, "Mrs. Cartwright provided historical provenance documentation for 9 of the items based on her late husband's notes and contacts." "So everyone on our list of suspects had some involvement with the questionable artifacts," I summarized. "Precisely. But there is something else." Poirot leaned back, his fingertips pressed together in his characteristic pose of contemplation. These dates of acquisition, when plotted against Dr. Hawthorne's diary entries regarding the cat's whiskers, They tell a story, do they not? I studied the timeline more carefully. The diary entries begin shortly after the acquisition of this small statue, I noted, pointing to an entry from 6 months prior. That must be when he first noticed something amiss and began his own investigation. Yes, Poirot nodded. And observe how his entries become more frequent, more urgent, in the weeks leading up to his death. He was piecing together the pattern just as we are now. Our discussion was interrupted by a knock at the door. Inspector Japp entered, looking more cheerful than I had seen him since the case began. "We've identified the poison," he announced without preamble. "Rare stuff, a compound derived from certain tropical plants, virtually untraceable once it enters the bloodstream, but leaves distinctive residue on the medium used to deliver it, in this case, the peacock feather." "Most illuminating," Poirot remarked. "And such a poison. It would require specialized knowledge to obtain and prepare, yes?" "Absolutely," Japp confirmed. "Not something your average murderer would have access to. We're checking with universities and research laboratories to see if any have reported missing supplies." After Japp departed, Poirot returned to the acquisition records with renewed enthusiasm. By mid-afternoon, he had constructed a second chart, this one tracking the movement of staff and trustees during key periods. "Look here, Hastings," he indicated a series of dates highlighted in red. "Lord Pemberton made trips to Cairo, Athens and Paris precisely 2 weeks before each major acquisition from Harrington and Sons. Coincidence, perhaps?" "It seems unlikely," I admitted. "But what about the peacock figurines specifically? When did they enter the collection?" Poirot consulted a separate file. "The peacock figurines of Amenhotep were donated 73 years ago by the Earl of Westmoreland, following an archaeological expedition he sponsored in the Valley of the Kings. They have been part of the permanent collection ever since." "So they don't fit the pattern of recent acquisitions," I frowned. "No, but consider this. Unlike the other substituted pieces, the peacock figurines were not replaced with less valuable analogues. They were disguised, their true nature and value concealed beneath modern paint. Why the difference in methodology?" Poirot tapped his forehead. "The little grey cells, they suggest that perhaps these figurines were special in some way. Perhaps they were not meant to leave the museum at all." As the afternoon wore on, Miss Webb brought us additional files that Dr. Hawthorne had kept in his office. Among them was a thin folder labelled simply UV testing, private. Inside were photographs of various artifacts under ultraviolet light, each meticulously labelled with dates and observations. Most were familiar to us from our own examinations, but there was one I did not recognise, a photograph of what appeared to be the ceramic cat itself, taken from an angle that emphasized the base where the hidden markings were located. A handwritten note in the margin caught my attention. "Compare with Stuttgart Museum Catalogue No. 157-B, same signature." Poirot seized upon this clue with enthusiasm. "Miss Webb," he called to the assistant curator who was arranging files nearby, "please inquire whether the Stuttgart Archaeological Museum could send us photographs of their item catalogue No. 157-B, particularly any UV examination images, if available." "Of course," she nodded, making a note. "But it may take some time to receive a response." "In the meanwhile," Poirot continued, "I would like to examine the ceramic cat once more. There may be details we overlooked in our earlier inspection." The ceramic cat had been moved to the conservation laboratory for safekeeping. Dr. Latimer was there when we arrived, examining one of the disguised peacock figurines under a powerful microscope. "Extraordinary craftsmanship," he remarked, without looking up from his work. "The original gold and inlay work is virtually untouched beneath the modern paint. Whoever did this understood the artifact's true value, and took great care to preserve it even while disguising it," Poirot observed. "Most interesting." He turned his attention to the ceramic cat which sat on a nearby workbench. Under the bright lights of the conservation lab, its green glaze gleamed with a subtle luster, while its amber eyes seemed to watch us with ancient intelligence. "Dr. Latimer," Poirot began conversationally, "you mentioned yesterday that Dr. Hawthorne had become interested in ultraviolet authentication techniques. Did he discuss with you what had originally prompted this interest?" Latimer straightened up from his microscope, removing his glasses to polish them with a handkerchief. "He mentioned receiving a letter from a colleague at the Stuttgart Museum," he replied after a moment's thought. "Something about similar anomalies discovered in their Egyptian collection. That would have been, perhaps 7 or 8 months ago. Just before his diary entries about the cat's whiskers began," I noted. "Precisely," Poirot nodded. "And now we find a reference to a specific Stuttgart catalogue item in his notes. The pieces, they begin to connect. Our examination of the ceramic cat revealed nothing new, but as we were preparing to leave the laboratory, Professor Wilkinson entered carrying a large reference volume. "Mr. Poirot," he called, his scholarly face animated with excitement. "I believe I've found something relevant to our investigation. This catalogue from the Berlin Egyptian Museum includes photographs of several small artifacts bearing striking similarities to items in our collection that show the hidden UV markings." We gathered around as he opened the book to a marked page. "Here," he pointed to a photograph of a small statuette. "Compare this with our item E347. The stylistic elements are nearly identical, yet the provenance information indicates they were found at different sites decades apart, suggesting that one is likely a forgery modelled after the other," Poirot concluded. "Exactly," Wilkinson nodded. "And there are at least 3 other examples here. I've taken the liberty of contacting colleagues at several European museums. If we're dealing with a systematic forgery operation, it's likely other institutions have been targeted as well." By early evening, the first responses to our inquiries began to arrive. The Stuttgart Museum confirmed that their item number 157B, a small alabaster offering dish, bore hidden markings identical to those found on our artifacts. The curator had sent photographs taken under ultraviolet light, along with a note indicating that they too were investigating possible authentication issues. As Poirot studied these images, I observed that his expression had taken on the particular intensity that always signalled he was approaching a solution. "The ceramic cat," he murmured, almost to himself. "It is the key, Hastings, not merely a signature or a taunt, but a message. A clue deliberately left for someone who would understand its significance." When we returned to our hotel that evening, we found that our rooms had been searched. The intrusion was subtle, papers slightly rearranged, a drawer not quite closed, but unmistakable to Poirot's meticulous eye. "Our investigation has made someone nervous, Hastings," he remarked, surveying the disturbance with professional interest rather than alarm, "which suggests we are moving in the right direction." That night, I lay awake longer than usual, my mind turning over the complex web of evidence we had gathered. Outside, London's fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, while somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of what promised to be a decisive day in our investigation. Chapter 8. The Cat Revealed. The following morning dawned bright and clear, the fog that had shrouded London having lifted overnight. As we walked to the British Museum, Poirot seemed unusually energetic, his steps light and purposeful. "Today, Hastings, we bring this affair to its conclusion," he announced, twirling his walking stick with a flourish. "I have requested that Sir Edmund gather all our suspects in the Egyptian Gallery at 11 o'clock. "You know who's responsible?" I asked, hurrying to keep pace with him. "The pieces have arranged themselves in the only possible pattern," he replied, tapping his forehead. The little grey cells have completed their work. Inspector Japp met us at the museum entrance, his expression a mixture of curiosity and professional scepticism. "I've arranged for 2 constables to be present, as you requested," he informed us. "Though I must say, Poirot, I'm not entirely convinced we have enough evidence for an arrest." "Patience, my friend," Poirot smiled enigmatically. "By noon, I believe the evidence will be most compelling." The Egyptian gallery had been closed to the public, its entrance guarded by a discreet but unmistakable police presence. Inside, the suspects had already assembled. Sir Edmund stood near the centre of the room, anxiously checking his watch. Lord Pemberton occupied a chair that had been provided for him, his aristocratic features arranged in an expression of mild boredom. Professor Wilkinson and Dr. Latimer conversed quietly near a display case. Miss Webb stood slightly apart, her composed demeanour betrayed only by the tension in her shoulders, and Mrs. Cartwright sat elegantly on a bench, her hands folded in her lap. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, moving to the centre of the gallery with the theatrical flair he often employed on such occasions. "I thank you for your attendance this morning. We have reached the culmination of our investigation into 2 interconnected crimes: the theft of the peacock figurines and the murder of Dr. Geoffrey Hawthorne." A small ripple of tension passed through the assembled group. Lord Pemberton shifted in his chair, his fingers drumming briefly on the armrest before becoming still. "Let us begin with what we know," Poirot continued. "For at least 5 years, a systematic operation has been underway, replacing valuable artifacts in the Egyptian collection with less valuable, though still authentic, pieces. These substituted pieces all bear a hidden signature, hieroglyphs visible only under ultraviolet light, which Dr. Hawthorne poetically termed the cat's whiskers." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Dr. Hawthorne discovered this scheme some months ago and began his own investigation, documenting his findings in coded entries in his diary. As he pieced together the pattern, he became dangerous to someone in this room, someone who silenced him permanently." "This is all very dramatic, Mr. Poirot," Lord Pemberton interrupted, his tone dismissive. "But I fail to see how repeatedly stating what we already know advances the investigation." "Ah, but we now know considerably more than before," Poirot replied mildly. "For instance, we know that the peacock figurines were never meant to leave the museum at all, merely to be disguised, their true nature concealed beneath ordinary paint. We know that acquisition records show a clear pattern connecting certain artifacts to specific individuals. And we know that Dr. Hawthorne had established links to similar substitutions in museums across Europe." He turned to the display case where the ceramic cat now sat alongside the cleaned peacock figurines, restored to their original splendour. "We also know that this seemingly insignificant ceramic cat is, in fact, the key to the entire mystery." "The cat?" Sir Edmund looked puzzled. "But it's just an ordinary late-period figurine." "Not quite ordinary," Poirot corrected. "It bears the same hidden signature as the substituted artifacts, but more importantly, it bears a second message, one that would be recognized only by someone familiar with a particular Egyptian proverb. The cat sees in darkness what remains hidden in light." He gestured to Dr. Fenwick, who had joined us that morning. Dr. Fenwick has confirmed that this proverb was often associated with the goddess Bastet, particularly in her role as protector against deception. The ceramic cat was not merely a taunt or a signature. It was a message from Dr. Hawthorne himself. A murmur of surprise ran through the group. Mrs. Cartwright leaned forward, her eyes widening. "Are you suggesting Geoffrey left the cat deliberately?" she asked. "Indeed, madame," Poirot nodded. Dr. Hawthorne had recognized the pattern of substitutions. He had identified the likely culprit, but he lacked definitive proof, so he created a trap, Removing the peacock figurines himself, disguising them as ordinary ibis figures and leaving the ceramic cat as both a clue and a challenge to the person he suspected. "But who?" Dr. Latimer asked, his fingers nervously adjusting his spectacles. Who did he suspect? Poirot's eyes swept the assembled group, finally coming to rest on Lord Pemberton. The evidence points to someone with authority to approve acquisitions with connections to international dealers and with the opportunity to manipulate authentication processes. Someone whose travels to Cairo, Athens, and Paris precisely preceded new acquisitions that later proved to bear the hidden markings. Lord Pemberton's face remained impassive, but a slight rigidity in his posture betrayed his tension. "This is absurd," he stated flatly. "I am a trustee of this institution with an impeccable reputation." "And yet," Poirot continued relentlessly, "when we examine the financial records of Harrington and Sons, the dealer through whom most of the substituted artifacts were acquired, we find a complex network of shell companies leading ultimately to offshore accounts controlled by one Richard Pemberton." A shocked silence fell over the gallery. Inspector Japp stepped forward, flipping open his notebook. "We've verified this information through financial investigators at Scotland Yard," he confirmed. "The paper trail is quite clear once you know where to look." "It was an ingenious scheme," Poirot acknowledged, his tone almost admiring. Genuine artifacts from the museum's collection were replaced with less valuable pieces, while the originals were sold through Harrington and Sons to private collectors who did not question their provenance. The profits were substantial, I imagine. Lord Pemberton's composure finally cracked. His face flushed darkly as he rose from his chair. "You cannot prove any of this," he hissed. "Financial connections are circumstantial at best." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded. "But there is more. The peacock feather that killed Dr. Hawthorne has been analysed extensively. The poison it contained is rare, but not unique. What is unique is the molecular signature of the compound, a signature that matches samples from a private laboratory funded by the Pemberton estate." "That's impossible!" Lord Pemberton's voice rose sharply. "Those records are sealed." "Ah, but in saying so you confirm their existence," Poirot observed quietly. The realization of his error washed visibly over Lord Pemberton's face. His shoulders sagged slightly as Inspector Japp stepped forward. "Lord Richard Pemberton, I am arresting you for the murder of Dr. Geoffrey Hawthorne and conspiracy to commit fraud," Japp stated formally. "You are not obliged to say anything, but anything you do say may be given in evidence." As the constables moved to escort Lord Pemberton from the gallery, Poirot added one final observation. The ceramic cat was Dr. Hawthorne's posthumous witness. He suspected you, but needed proof that would stand up to scrutiny. By removing and disguising the peacock figurines himself and leaving the cat, he forced you to act, knowing that under ultraviolet light, the cat would reveal not only your signature, but his message. Later, as we sat in Poirot's flat with Inspector Japp, enjoying a celebratory glass of wine, the conversation turned to the details of the case. "What I still don't understand," Japp admitted, "is why Pemberton didn't simply destroy the peacock figurines instead of disguising them. Seems an unnecessary risk." "Ah, but they were exceptionally valuable," Poirot explained. "Too valuable to destroy, too recognizable to sell immediately. He needed time to arrange for their discreet disposal to a specific collector who had commissioned their theft." "And Dr. Hawthorne's discovery of the scheme?" I asked. "How did that unfold?" "He noticed discrepancies during routine conservation work," Poirot replied. "The Stuttgart Museum had contacted him about similar concerns, which led him to begin examining artifacts under ultraviolet light. Once he observed the hidden markings, the cat's whiskers, he documented each instance while building his case against Lord Pemberton." "And the other suspects?" Japp inquired. "Were they completely uninvolved?" "Not entirely," Poirot shook his head. Professor Wilkinson had indeed noticed anomalies but lacked sufficient evidence to make accusations. Miss Webb suspected something amiss, but feared for her position if she spoke up without proof. Dr. Latimer was simply nervous by nature and worried that his own authentication work might be called into question, and Mrs. Cartwright was protecting her late husband's legacy by privately investigating alongside Dr. Hawthorne. He sipped his wine thoughtfully. What none of them realized was that Dr. Hawthorne had progressed further in his investigation than he revealed. The ceramic cat was his final move in a game that sadly cost him his life, but ultimately exposed the truth. As evening fell over London, I reflected on the case's complexity and the brilliance with which Poirot had unravelled it. The peacock figurines had been restored to their rightful display, the ceramic cat positioned nearby as a silent reminder of the tragedy and triumph that had unfolded in the museum's hushed galleries. Lord Pemberton awaited trial, his reputation in ruins, while museums across Europe had begun examining their collections with new scrutiny. The Cat Among the Peacocks had indeed revealed what remained hidden, a truth that had been, as in so many of Poirot's cases, concealed not in darkness, but in plain sight all along. Thank you for joining me on Cafe Stories for The Cat Among the Peacocks. If you enjoyed Poirot's methodical unravelling of this museum mystery, please hit the like button and subscribe for more classic detective tales. Until next time, goodbye.